Today we're going to talk about the biggest mistake that beginning storytellers make, and it often boils down to not understanding the fundamental element of what storytelling really is. Thank you for subscribing, liking, all your comments and questions. I really do appreciate it. Let's jump in. To get at the biggest mistake with storytelling, we have to first deal with this question: what is the goal of storytelling? Now, for some of you, you might say, well, I want to tell stories because it helps me make sense of the world. And this is true. It helps us make sense of what's going on, and it helps us with things that we want to share and things that we've learned. So, it kind of just helps us make sense of the world. And that's why we write. Some of us like to write just to process things. We also might say, well, what is the goal of storytelling? Well, it might be to educate people. Right? Maybe we want to inform other people about something that we see as important and that we think they should see as important. So we want to inform them. We want to educate them a little bit. Maybe we want to just change the opinions of someone. So we write a story in such a way that we're trying to persuade people to think differently or to look at the world in a different way. Maybe we just want to entertain people. Our world is kind of crazy. And so maybe we just want to entertain people. We want to break. We want to get away. We just want to entertain people. And that's a perfectly legitimate answer. Maybe even along the way, maybe we want to make some money. We want to tell stories and we can sell our novel or sell a screenplay, sell a book of poetry. And we want to make some money with the things that we are writing, with the stories that we are telling. And all of those are great and good and wonderful reasons, but they're not really reasons about what is the goal of storytelling. They might be reasons for why we choose to tell a story, but that's not really the same thing. The goal of storytelling simply is this: avoid boredom. And there's two factors that must be opposed in this quest to avoid boredom. The first one is predictability. We've all seen and read stories that just feel predictable. We're reading a novel and we go, oh, I know who the killer is by page 10. It's like, oh, it's so disappointing. It's predictable, right? It's overly predictable, and that's bad, okay? Predictability, if we know what's coming as an audience, we tune out. The other one to avoid is on the other end of the spectrum. So over here we've got, predictability, and on the other side we have incomprehensibility. This is where we're trying to be so clever and so smart and so unique in our storytelling that the audience just gets completely lost and confused, and they have no idea what's going on, right? When you start jumbling the story around, oh, I'm trying to be clever. Well, clever is good, but sometimes it starts to get into incomprehensibility. And if it's incomprehensible, the audience checks out. They're done. Right? So boredom is, if I can't follow it, I'm out. That's incomprehensible. Or it's so predictable, I just can't do it, I'm out. Both of those are bad. And we want to avoid both of those. Now, making money, to entertain, to change opinions, to educate, inform other people, all of those are great. But if your story is predictable or confusing, nobody's going to follow it. None of that's going to happen. One of the things that we have to do, and this is where the biggest mistake comes in, is beginning storytellers, and even some of us that have been at it a while, we start mixing and forgetting that there are actually two pieces of this puzzle. On one side, there's the story, right? This is the story itself. The beats, what happens, the main character, the antagonist, all those things make up the story. And then there's the storytelling. Right? This is where the audience is experiencing the story. And the biggest mistake that we tend to make is we start thinking if we have a good idea for a story, that automatically means it's going to be successful. And that's not true. A good idea does not mean that it's going to be a good story. Storytelling is a craft. It's a way of communicating to the audience, hey, here, let me take you on a ride. Let me give you an emotional experience that you're going to love and experience. You're going to fall in love with these characters. You may hate some characters. It's going to be great, but it's not going to be predictable, and it's going to be comprehensible. You're going to be able to understand it. So we're going to avoid boredom. You're going to be with the whole time. So let's go and do that. And that's really the core. So let's break those two things apart here for a minute. First, let's talk about story. The technical definition of story is it is a chronological sequence of events. I mean, that's the easiest way to talk about it. A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D, right? A better definition would be this. I first saw this attributed to Frank Daniel. It might be attributed to someone else, but it's simply this. A story is about someone who wants something very badly, and they're having trouble getting it, and then they get it or they don't. And in many ways, that boils down what a story is. It includes main character, it includes conflict, includes obstacles, gives me a story, gives me resolution. And if you can boil down your story into those elements, you at least know, okay, I've got a complete story here to work with. Someone who wants something badly, who's having trouble getting it, and they get it or they don't. I'll at least know, all right, I've got a decent story here. Now, storytelling, though, that's not the same thing. Storytelling is how the story is put together and the choice of the point of view that the storyteller chooses to use to create emotional responses in the audience. You want your audience, whether they're reading it, listening to a song, watching a movie, whatever it is, you want them to be emotionally experiencing the story. So I can have a story about someone who wants something badly, is having trouble getting it, they get it or they don't. I can do that. But I also have to pay attention to the emotional experience of the audience. And that is storytelling. So I can have the story, but I also have to craft the story in a way that engages and taps into the emotional experiences and the emotional elements of the audience. And if I don't do that, I'm not going to be a successful storyteller. And the choices of how you tell a story depend on four things. So let me give you four things really quick. First is the content. Okay, the content or the subject matter. Now, you might have a story that might lend itself to humor, but you also may not. So the way you engage the audience, the way you bring them in, you have to consider the content of what your story is about. So first is content. Second is the order that the elements of the story are communicated. Now, you can tell a story out of sequential order, right? A story is in sequential order, but you don't have to tell it that way. You may choose to tell it out of order, and that's perfectly fine. You just have to be aware that you don't want to create predictability or incomprehensibility when you're doing it. But you do have to pay attention to the order and how you're telling the story. The third thing that you want to pay attention to is the medium. Okay, the medium you're using to communicate the story. Now, you may be writing a song or writing a poem or a short story, a novel, screenplay, a host of other things. You can do all kinds of things to tell a story, but you have to pay attention to the medium because how the audience is going to experience your story impacts how you can emotionally engage with them. The fourth thing you have to think about is the audience and who should be receiving your story. A lot of times when I teach storytelling, I will ask students like, who's your audience? And they'll be like, oh, everybody. Like, everybody is not your audience. Everybody is actually never your audience. Who is the audience you're targeting? Are you targeting older people? Are you targeting single people? Are you targeting people under 18? Are you targeting girls from 13 to 15? Are you targeting men from 40 to 50? Who is the audience who's going to receive this? Because if you're not thinking of them and thinking about them when you're telling a story, you're going to miss the mark. Because if you're trying to emotionally gauge a 13 to 15-year-old girl, you're going to totally disengage a 40 to 50-year-old man, right? So you have to be aware of who your audience is. And it's not just their ages. It's gender, demographic, their race, their financial well-being, where they're coming from. All of those things contribute. One tip I will often tell people is, hey, try to imagine somebody that you know who fits your target audience and try to imagine you're telling the story to them. And a lot of times that will help you kind of focus your thing. So the content, order, medium, and audience. But if you're not paying attention to these four things, you're gonna end up putting your audience in a coma, and that's bad. We don't want to do that. Hopefully this has been helpful to you. If it has, please subscribe, like, bell. Feel free to leave comments, questions below. I'll reply to those as I am able. Otherwise, happy writing. And if you're going to take time to tell a story, be sure to tell a story that matters. See you later.